So it's another episode of Why Are We Like This, the true crime podcast, where the entire state of Florida is one big active crime scene. I'm David Quinones, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Tomas Kennedy. Tomas?
Hey, y'all. Good to see you.
And, of course, my other co-host, the stalwart, the indefatigable, Gerald Doherty. Jerry, how goes it?
Never been defatigated, never will be.
So, fellas, election nights, they come and go. But rarely does one election night come along that completely encapsulates the rationale for your podcast and exactly why your podcast should exist. It felt like Florida was absolutely an outlier. Maybe you could add it to a couple of other states like Ohio, Nevada still out. We're going to get into all of that. But we also want to talk immigration today. And our guest for today's conversation is Danny Rivero, reporter and producer at Miami's NPR affiliate WLRN, and a fixture in state and local news. If you live down here, you know Danny. He's coming off a late night covering the midterms, but he's taking some time to talk us through it. And you can find him on Twitter at TooMuchMe. Danny, welcome to Why Are We Like This?
Thanks for having me, David.
So we also want to plug Danny's new podcast. Not that new anymore. It's been out for a couple of months. Detention by Design. A 6-part series that came out in September and explores the roots of immigration detention centers in the U.S. and how they came to house tens of thousands of detainees every day. Contrary to what a lot of people might think, this phenomenon, it didn't originate in the U.S. or Mexico border, but right here in Florida through a series of crude experiments in small jails many decades ago. You can find Detention by Design on WLRN.org or wherever you get your podcasts. I want to jump into the conversation about last night's elections and midterm election and takeaways and stuff like that. But Danny, can you tell us a little bit about Detention by Design and what its origin was, where that idea came from?
Yeah, I mean the origin kind of goes back. I've been thinking about doing it for a while, and a lot of it actually goes back to the Trump administration. It was like 2019 when I first had the first idea, and that was when everyone was talking about what the Trump administration was doing on the southern border, the amount of people that were finding themselves in detention, families getting separated. And it was during that time where I was doing reporting on it down here in Florida, and I was reading a lot about it in the different media coverage. And there was one line in a Washington Post piece that said, all this immigration detention stuff, this all started in Florida with the arrival of Haitians, and then it moved on. I was like, what? I didn't know that. What do you mean? And it just it was like a nugget that was in my head. And time went on, and I couldn't let go of the idea. And I did actually a small story about it for us, and then I took it to my editor about the origins of the immigration detention system, and we had a conversation. She was like, "This is not one story. This is a whole series, this is there's so much to it with local and national history. It really needs to be expanded and given the room to get into everything that it needs to get into." And I'm super happy with how it came out. I've heard amazing things. A professor at Miami-Dade College actually just told me last week that he's already started to incorporate it into the curriculum, which is really awesome to hear. And, I'm excited that it's out in the world.
Yeah, it dispels a lot of I don't want to call them myths or anything, but maybe just areas where the average person is a lack of knowledge or ignorant. Because I think that if you have some passing awareness with America's our perverse obsession with immigration or our opposition to it, you might think of the Braceros program. You might think of even further back, the Chinese Adjustment Act and things like that. But this sort of punitive posture that we have towards people who want to come to our country, it's kind of new. It's only in the last 50 years that we've been doing this kind of stuff. And I want to get into that with you. And we talked a little bit before we started recording about the prominence of this issue on a national scale during the midterms. But I want to open it up to everybody. Like, guys, what did you think? We're coming out of last night where Florida, I think, pretty much cemented its reputation as what the nation thinks of it is, which is like a deeply red state. Tomas, I don't know, what were your takeaways from last night?
I mean, there's just so many things to dissect here, and so many failures. But I think that Florida Democrats need to take a hard look at themselves and just be honest about their many failings. There are a lot of like atmospheric reasons as to why Democrats underperform, whether it's the economy. Obviously, there's like voter suppression by the state. You know what I mean? Like there's external factors, but the reality is also that our party sucks. Like our infrastructure is just not where it was during the Obama era. We've completely have given up on voter registration. We've completely have given up on voter turnout, on list building. All our election targeting is done through algorithms. Our data sucks. Our messaging is awful. We just talk about bullshit all the time instead of like pocketbook issues and the economy, things that matter to people. I mean, we're the party of FDR. We should be talking about union jobs. We should be talking about wages. We should be talking about Medicare, Social Security, home ownership, affordable housing, right? Like things that actually matter to people. And of course, we don't give up on the culture war stuff, and we don't become like rabid reactionaries because of it. But we can't be leading with that stuff. And then obviously, I've been talking about this for a long time. Our party has become an ATM machine for grifter consultants. And to be fair, the Republican Party of Florida is the same thing, but the difference is that their consultants win. So they can grift and make money out of commission fees, but they win. Like our grifter consultants lose and they get rehired. And we see the same names over and over in the same campaigns. So I just think there's a lot to dissect here. I don't know. I mean, I'm especially curious what Danny thinks,
Yeah, Danny, I want to get to your takeaway from last night. Just to frame it a little bit, a couple of takeaways. Obviously, Ron DeSantis won by a very healthy margin.
18, crazy.
Among, of course, to me, this was of note, won 55-45 among Puerto Ricans in Florida.
Yeah,
55-45. Just an unbelievable performance. And if you told me that this happened couched in the middle of what everybody had taken to calling a potential red wave, I'd say, wow, okay, well, it makes sense. But if you take Florida and Ohio out of the picture, Democrats, like in pretty much every observable metric, won last night, which is like saying, like, if the queen had balls, she'd be king. But still, like it's notable. I don't know, Danny, what do you think?
I mean, yeah. If you look at the national map, Democrats did really well, and then you look at Florida, and I was looking at the governor numbers of races across the country. The governor race in Oklahoma was closer than the governor race in Florida. Do you know how insane that is?
That's insane.
I'll one up you. We lost in Miami Beach. We lost a house race in Miami Beach, a state house race.
But back to Oklahoma, though, because, I spent some time there at my last job doing a documentary. I got to know the state pretty well. Oklahoma is pretty broadly considered like the reddest of the red states.
Yeah.
Where Democrats are basically, they have no chance. It was a big deal when they won one House seat there. The race in Oklahoma was closer than Florida. I mean, that alone, I mean, this has been an ongoing shift, and then it just all, bam, it all happened at once. And it's, on some level, it's not really surprising. I actually want to say, Tomas, you owe me a drink.
I'm happy.
because I ran into Tomas at the bar, the corner, a couple months ago. We actually made a little bet that I remembered. I said I think Miami-Dade is going to go red, and
sure enough.
a friendly bet. So Tomas, you owe me a drink. But I think it didn't come out of nowhere. I mean, if someone had their eyes open on what was going on here, talking to people in Westchester and, you know, the city of Miami and some of the far-flung suburbs. I mean, it's been turning red. I mean, it's just been happening.
To your point earlier, David, about Puerto Rico, I was going through old articles from 2018 about people from Puerto Rico coming over from Hurricane Maria, and that the person most aggressive in outreach efforts in those times was Rick Scott, not any Democratic Party outfit or organization. So your point about like a 10-point margin among Puerto Ricans, when they're only being reached out to from one side, it's almost like we should be surprised that there's surprise. Like, you know, how long can you keep sleepwalking before you ask, you know, why you're not getting anywhere? Eventually you got to wake up.
I'll tell you guys a story. In 2005, I was living in Las Vegas and I moved. I didn't move. I visited my family in Orlando, Puerto Rican. Shocking, right? Living in Orlando. And my grandmother, who at the time was about like in her like late 70s, had a scrawled piece of paper on her fridge with a phone number on it. And it said, call me on it. And I asked her, I was like, well, what is this from? And she goes, oh, that was a very helpful gentleman that I met dealing with your grandfather's medical bills. His name is Bill Nelson. He's our senator. And he gave me his phone number. And it was a handwritten note from Bill Nelson. It was his cell phone number. And I mean, whatever. I don't want to relitigate Bill Nelson's incompetent 2018 campaign. But like, that's the difference, man. There used to be that like on the ground level, and don't like ever mistake me for somebody who's gonna, you know, mistake Bill Nelson for some grassroots activist. But fuck, my grandmother, my 75-year-old grandmother had his cell phone number up on her fridge. And I wonder how many Puerto Rican grandmothers have a Democrat's phone number up on their fridge in Orlando right now, not counting Anna's constituency, other than Anna.
If I can add something here, I mean, part of my analysis on why this flip happened right now, especially here in Miami, is like, I don't think Democrats have fully grasped how bad they did in 2020 in the first place and how much that played into it. Like during 2020, when it was fashionable, I guess I would say, for Democrats to say, no, we're going to stay home. We're going to do all our campaigning virtually. We're going to limit contact, whatnot. Do you know what was happening? Republicans were knocking on every freaking door that they could find.
Yeah.
They were connecting with voters, following up with voters, not just digitally, but they were doing that too. But they were making face-to-face interactions. I don't think Democrats have grasped how much ground they lost in the 2020 election because of that. And I don't think they've even started to recover.
No, I actually agree 100%. And I think the proof is in the pudding, because the campaigns in 2020 that never got out of the field won. Whether it was Luisa Santos for school board in Miami-Dade, where it was Daniela Levine Cava, who had an incredibly robust field operation, where it was Anna Skemani in Orange County, who, you know, retained her House seat and actually flipped some Trump precincts.
Yep.
You know, like, field is not the end all be all, but it works. And the Republicans have built a really robust field operation that includes voter registration, voter turnout, persuasion. They have this Hispanic community centers. They have one in Doral where they actually do roundtables and press conferences, and they have naturalization clinics. So, yeah, I agree completely. And actually, I'll one up you, Danny. And it wasn't just the Democrats. It was the third party groups, the C4s. I actually was working for an immigration-based nonprofit that moved everything virtual during the pandemic and remained, you know, virtual through most of it, even after, you know, it was safe, even after campaigns and organizations developed, you know, techniques to, you know, that were deemed safe, right, in terms of health guidelines to interact with the public. And I just couldn't do it anymore. I was like, I'm tired of being home. I'm tired of being in Zoom. I'm an organizer. I like interacting with people. I want to be outside. I want to be doing this work. And the truth is, a lot of organizations shifted to digital. They got lazy.
Yeah.
And they remained there, and they were aided and abetted by donors, you know, and just, you know, the orientation of a party that got into this like pandemic safety mindset and refused to shift away from it. And I'll say one more thing is I knew we were in trouble in 2020 when I saw DeSantis go on a press conference and he said the Zoom class wants to mandate lockdowns against the rest of us who have to work every day to earn a living. When he said the Zoom class, I knew that he was tapping into an economic populist messaging
Right.
that is just so foreign and alien to the Democrats that like they just can't even begin to grasp it. It's just
And you know, to that same point, I mean, if DeSantis had one relatively uncontroversial, even though I know it's uncontroversial thing that really worked in his favor, it was COVID policy. I mean, in 2021, when I started hearing from people that are not political, people that I know, like, thank God we live in Florida, because look at what's happening in California. Like, can you believe that? And me in my head thinking like, holy shit, like people in California are in lockdown. Like that matters. That mattered a lot, you know, and that wasn't like a left or right thing, even though it kind of became one. But that was just like, he got on a lot of people's good side on that, not necessarily on the left and right spectrum. It's just like,
This was something that I was in the chat bitching earnestly about last night, which was that just I'm trying to think of a good metaphor and I can't, because it's like I still think that, like, taken as components, saying like, hey, we should all work from home if we can, and you know, and embrace whatever these policies in spring, summer, fall of 2020. I still think that was a good idea. I look at the overall economic benefit. I know that we love to talk about it a lot, but when you look at the raw numbers in Florida's unemployment, we don't even know what Florida's unemployment is, because one thing we learned during the pandemic is we don't fucking know how many people are actually unemployed in this state, because the website that records it is only open during banking hours and only works like 10% of the time. So we have no idea what the actual unemployment numbers are. But if they are what we think that they are, then they, I mean, was it really worth? It's like what, half of a percentage point better than California, than New York? Like, okay, great. So what, we let like some outsized amount of our population higher than, especially post availability of the vaccine, die for that, what, half of a percentage point in unemployment rate? To be able to, this goes both ways, right? Like, we saw somebody who ran for statewide office, who was running as who put on a Grim Reaper costume and walked around on the fucking beach for a month and got a lot of profile from doing that. And he was fucking wrong. Those people who were out there on the beach were safe. They were fine. And he ran as a Democrat and actually got a few votes. I don't know, man. I look back in hindsight and I'm like, we just like abandoned the stuff that like Democrats abandoned the shit that they were actually right about and ceded ground and said like, oh, you're right, we should have just let everyone fucking die. And I don't know, man. This is the stickiest one, because the thing that you said, Danny, that's most correct is that it worked. It worked. It did turn into a political issue. And if you want to gauge the true north of that based on like, did it get the votes? Fuck yeah, it got the votes, man. Everybody who didn't want to deal with lockdowns came here. Some of them moved here.
And I mean, I think DeSantis, to his credit, I mean, he made a big gamble in COVID. I mean, especially when you think of like how the education system would work. You know, he brought people back into the classroom when everyone, you know, on the other side of the aisle was like flipping out, and the unions were going crazy, and you know, and there was an uncertainty either way. Like there was no certainty if this was a good thing or if this was a bad thing. But the governor made a decision, and actually that panned out. He made the right gamble. You know what I mean? And there was a general unwillingness once, you know, the facts started to emerge of where this actually turned, like where everything landed, to acknowledge that the governor was right. You know, and then that entrenchment, I think, turned a lot of people off too. It was like, hold on, you didn't want the kids back in class. okay, the schoolrooms are not that big of an issue for COVID. Now we're seeing data coming out that the kids that were kept from the classroom, their test scores and learning in general are super lagging.
Yeah.
Florida's not really a part of that. Like, the governor was right on that. Point blank, he was right on that. And that was a big issue for a lot of parents.
Parents, sorry, go ahead, T.
No, I would say I actually agree with a lot of that, Danny. I mean, it's complicated, right? Because I think the governor was actually wrong on a lot of things. And he was right on some of them. I mean, we can't also ignore the fact that 84,000 people died in this state. I mean, it's a lot of people. And I just think Democrats just sounded fucking hysterical, unneededly so, when we could have focused on the fundamentals, which is like government's being irresponsible, like you should wear a mask. Why isn't he just, even if he's not doing a mask mandate, would it really hurt for him to just encourage it a little bit? And even if we don't do a vaccine mandate, would it really hurt for him to just say, hey, vaccines work more vigorously and encourage people to get vaccinated to protect lives? And just say, hey, we are not going to mandate anything and we're not going to lock you down in your home. We respect that and we believe that. But there was just such a chorus of like, you know, hyper partisan, like left voices that made it difficult for like our elected officials and like people in the Democratic Party to go against that. Right. And I do think there was like a just reflexive position to just go against anything DeSantis said. And the school thing, it's true. Like, I've been saying it for a long time. You guys can attest to this. Closing down the schools, it was bad. Like, I finished my master's program during late 2020 and early 2021. And me, as a 30-year-old man, was having a very difficult time paying attention in my University of Miami Zoom classes. Right. I can't imagine how hard it would be for a freaking 8-year-old or a 9-year-old.
I can tell you exactly what it was like now she's an 8-year-old, but at the time she was 6 and 7. What it was like for her she was going stir crazy. My daughter was going fucking bonkers.
Of course, and you know, we just can't have kids not going to school. Like that's just a reality. But at the same time, you know, again, it's just this propensity for Democrats to just reflexively, you know, do everything against DeSantis and not just take the common sense approach. And the reality is that I think most Democrats did have like our position at the end of the day was the common sense position, which was we don't want to lock you down in your home, but we would like people to take some common sense, precautionary, like health, you know, like guidelines to, you know, again, wearing a mask, I think is good. Like,
I think Danny was onto something.
Mask will not help stop the spread of the virus.
I think Danny's onto something because his framing, if you listen to what he said, he's framing it as DeSantis was right, DeSantis wins, and it's all in the framework of political messaging. Is he right? In the framework of winning an election in what used to be a 50-50 state by what's the latest thing? What did he win by? 78 points or something against Chris? I don't know. Like, you fucking crushed him. That's like, yeah, man, you can play the result now. You can with the 80,000 dead people, but like still he did the right thing to become governor, a second-term governor, after only narrowly by the hair of his chin winning in 2018, and probably become president in a couple of years after Donald Trump chokes on a fucking KFC chicken wing or something.
I would say, you know, the thing we don't know is how much this landslide in Florida will translate to the rest of the country. Because when you see, like, you know, Pennsylvania and stuff, like, that's going to be an uphill battle. I mean, obviously, like, Governor DeSantis has Florida locked, but the rest of the country is not Florida.
No.
Like, the political messaging here is so hyper local, especially when it comes to the Latino community, because it's the community with the history that's receptive to that messaging. That's not going to play in Pennsylvania or Wisconsin.
Michigan went very blue this cycle. Like they had a lot of pickups,
both
you know, and it wasn't for lack of effort of making Gretchen Whitmer a COVID boogie person herself. She still did, like the Democratic Party there is now debating if we pick up the chambers at the state level, we're going to repeal right to work. Like there are real benefits to like putting a message of we care about your lives and your livelihoods. Like that's the winning message. Like I understand where a lot of the anxiety about school closures and all the rest comes from, because in hindsight, we know that kids were much less at risk. But at the time, the question was, how are we going to save as many lives as possible? And it's only in hindsight that now we realize, okay, kids were not nearly as at risk as elderly, older people with respiratory issues, what have you.
Yeah.
But the political message, to David's point, the political message of just live a life, come move here and live a life of convenience. That sells. That's easy to. I can sell that.
Live every day like it's 2019.
Yeah, that's an easy message to sell to people.
You know what? I love that message. I actually love the idea of like living every day like it's 2019 again. You tell me there's a button I can push to make it be 2019. Fuck yeah, man.
Easy.
I'll
and listen, 98% survival rate. Odds are that 2% who die, that'll be someone else.
Yeah,
someone you probably don't know.
Somebody you don't know.
But Danny, actually, I have a question for you, because I think you're the only one in this conversation that actually grew up. You grew up in Miami, right? You're like a Miami native. Yeah. So to the core of the question that makes up this podcast, why are we like this? Why is that message playing in Florida but not in Pennsylvania and Michigan, everywhere else in the country?
Well, there's a couple different takeaways, right? I mean, one thing is like the historical perspective. Like Florida has for a long time, it's a southern state, obviously, but it hasn't really been southern in the sense that most people that live here move here from somewhere else. Right. Like Florida is a southern state because it chooses to be a southern state. Like, even back in like the early 1900s, like the majority of people that lived here came from the north. But once they moved down here, they adopted kind of Jim Crow views and whatnot, right? So that's one thing. It's like, who's moving into the state and what are they taking with them? And over the last couple of years, especially, it's been almost like a partisan decision to move to Florida, where it wasn't before.
Yeah.
So you're changing the makeup of the electorate.
It's a virtue signal. It's like, look at me, look at what I'm doing, look at how much I believe in. Yeah, I'm leaving my little house in Staten Island, because it's always fucking Staten Island, and I'm moving down to Miami and getting a house probably about the same size.
People talk about moving to Florida with the same gusto of like, I'm adopting a new sports team. Like it's not only I'm moving from A to B, I'm adopting a whole different lifestyle. Florida
is my personality now.
Yeah, basically, yes.
Yeah.
Right. So that's one thing. It's like, who's moving into Florida? And let's be real, like Florida is a growth state, and we grow from other parts of the country. So if you're attracting people that are super conservative, of course you're going to be conservative, and there's not enough native homegrown population to counterbalance that, because the people that are born here and tend to live here, if you look at the stats, at least last time I did, they tend to vote Democrat. But the out of state growth is faster than the native growth, because that's our whole economy is based on growth. So that's one thing. And then the other thing with the Latino community is just a different profile. It's a different perspective than what the national trends are. You know what I mean? I mean, I hate the national conversations about talking about Latino voters and like, what are they going to do? It's like, it's just bullshit. Like, yeah, like it doesn't account for the geography of where people come from and where they live. I remember like when Sonia Sotomayor was elevated to the Supreme Court, reading coverage of like, oh, Latinos are going to be like so into this in Texas. I'm like, are you people dumb?
No,
she's a freaking Puerto Rican from the Bronx, bro. Like, you think people in like the Rio Grande Valley like connect with her in some way? Like,
Danny, do you remember when we were working together? It was like right around the time, I think it was like right after the 2012 election, right after Obama won Florida for the second time in a row. And Tomas, you remember this moment too, Jared. Actually, I want to hear all of you guys' perspective on this. There was this conversation that became codified knowledge, and just like, this is the way it is. Latinos, again, that big broad tent of Latinos, which means 30 different types of people, but Latinos
Here.
Yeah, here it does. And black people, which actually in Florida, saying black people means also a lot of different things. And well, you know what? They're just demographics is destiny. Florida, check it off. It's going to be blue for the rest of forever. And I guess it just extended to like, we don't have to spend any money or build any infrastructure there anymore because they voted for Obama twice. And that means that they're going to vote for us for fucking ever. I mean, like, I don't know. Just kind of throwing that out there because that seems like the key moment, the misstep where all of the GOP investment started building up and Florida started becoming this target as like a firewall. Because if there was a world where that happened, there is zero mathematical chance for anybody, any president, for example, to win a national election. Any conservative president to win there's no path to a presidency without winning Florida for a conservative. There just isn't one by the numbers. I don't know, T, what do you remember about that time? It must have been like celebratory and like, I guess we're going to be in charge forever.
I mean, I've only been involved in like electoral politics since 2016 with the Bernie movement, really. Before that, I was an immigration rights activist because I was undocumented myself. And that's how I got involved in politics. But the only person that I ever campaigned for before 2016 was Jose Javier Rodriguez when he ran in 2014. And that's because he was involved in immigrant rights world and he was involved in legal services. And I just really believed in him. But aside from that, like, I don't know, like during the Obama years, like I was outside of like Leadership Blue and like Democratic Party offices with the Porter in Chief sign, to be honest. Yeah. Like, because he was deporting a lot of fucking people and and we were pressuring him to get DACA. So I don't know, like I'm not like a rah like Democrat, you know what I mean? I'm just like a realist that like sees like Republicans to me are vile, and they've had people like Tom Tancredo, for example, who's a congressman that used to say that like undocumented immigrants are bringing leprosy across the border. And I remember watching that while I was undocumented, on CNN, like after I got from school and being like, these people fucking suck. Like they're awful. And they talk shit about me and my parents. And the Democrats seem like a little bit friendlier. So I guess I'll support them. But I don't know, I think I agree actually a lot with Danny. I think, like the way that we talk about like Latino outreach and like Latinos not being a monolith and like we need to do micro targeting and all that stuff, like like we should do that and we should be culturally sensitive and we should understand communities and be educated and try to connect with them. But also like Latinos are like any other people. Like we want like safe communities and we want like clean communities and we want like our kids to go to good like schools and we want them to be able to get like a college education and like succeed and get good jobs, and we want to feel like economic safety and that there's like a semblance of stability to our lives, and that like the so-called American dream can be achieved. Like it's not that complicated. Like yes, we should have culturally sensitive messaging and we should understand who we are talking to because but also we're all human beings. Like we all want the same things at the end of the day. Like the fundamentals are the fundamentals. I don't know, that's how I feel about it.
Yeah, the demographics thing it's gonna be interesting to see how it plays out long term, because we don't know now if this is a blip or if this is here to stay. But I do remember reading the census numbers when they came out, and the census is projecting that by 2030, Florida is going to be a majority minority state. Yeah. Which is pretty freaking remarkable, actually. Yeah. And especially remarkable if Republicans hold on to their grip on power here. Like that goes against all, back to David, what you said, like the conventional wisdom of the Obama era. Like that would flip it on its head. And obviously the Republicans are doing something right to, if that's the case.
Yeah, I will say something there. Like Florida, kind of like Ohio in a lot of ways, actually. It's a very finicky state electorally. Like it's swung a lot. Yeah, I mean, obviously, historically it's been a Dixiecrat state. It's been a Democrat state, but not. I don't think the type of Democrat that anybody in this call would like to see.
There were some pretty progressive, very progressive governors in the 70s.
Ruben Askew, for example, who I think is the greatest governor that Florida has ever had, who's an economic populist and anti-corruption and government transparency governor. So yeah,
you guys remember Dante Fascell? Dante Fascell was also a pretty good Democratic. He wasn't a governor. He was, I think, a rep, right? But still, like another one.
It's true, yeah. So there's definitely been really good like Democratic governors. But my point is, it's historically been Democrat. Then it started shifting Republican in like the late 90s. There was like a Republican wave in the early 2000s. Then, Bill Nelson managed to hold on until 2018 as our U.S. Democratic U.S. Senator. In 08 and 12, a guy named Barack Obama, wins against all odds and against conventional wisdom, Florida twice. And even in 2018, I mean, Democrats lost like the governorship and the Senate, but we did win the Commission of Agriculture. We did flip 5 House seats. We flipped a state Senate seat. We flipped 2 congressionals. It wasn't all a wash. What I'm trying to get at is that Florida is finicky. It swings very drastically, and it's the Latino vote, and particularly the Cuban vote, actually, that has really swung very, very wildly throughout the decades.
If I can just add something to that, the Republican Party is actually in a pretty interesting position now because they have super majorities now.
The dog that caught the car. The dog that caught the car.
Yeah, they have super majorities in the House and the Senate. They won all the cabinet races. I mean, Florida has real problems on its hands. And then for the first time that I can remember in my lifetime, like one party and one party alone has all the power. Like Democrats effectively have no power whatsoever.
Right.
At some point, the party is going to have to address the problems that Floridians have. And people are going to be seeing it. I mean, the home insurance rates, holy shit, that's an issue. That's like a really big issue, and it's only getting worse, right?
Update for listeners from episode 1. I actually found homeowners insurance, so I'm insured now. But it was but thank you everybody. But it was some real like some J.R.R. Tolkien mission level shit to like Frodo crossing Middle Earth type shit to get my home insured.
And to your point, Danny, like we are like, I know this sounds like apocalyptic and like hyperbolic, but I really do think that there's a world where like Florida gets hit increasingly by hurricanes. The frivolous lawsuits continue. The property insurers decided to leave because it's just completely financially unfeasible. We have 5 left. 5 of them leave because the more that leaves, the more that the market is unfeasible for them. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. We're left with Citizens, the state-run, insurer market. At what point does the mortgage, like banks, decide to stop giving mortgages to like Florida homeowners because they can't get property insurance for their homes? I mean, that is like a real possibility that it becomes just.
I think it's a really good question, but I have I've been developing kind of a theory in my head that's like, I'll just spell it out now. But Florida is it's a weird state because like Florida as an economy and as a state, it's too big to fail. Like,
yeah,
the federal government will never, ever let the real estate market here tank.
No.
If it even started to go that direction, the federal government, no matter who's in office, if it's Democrats in the White House or Republicans, they are going to step in and bail it out. It's like there is so much capital here, so much value. The Great Depression started actually from the hurricane in 1926, which tanked the real estate market.
Yeah.
It started the process of the banks failing. That's historical, you know what I mean? And then in 2008, 2007, Where was the hardest hit place? Here. The federal government had to step in and prop the whole thing up, right?
Can you imagine a world where like that happens and George Perez, related group, Mickey Arison aren't immediately on the phone and getting some kind of bailout? Of course,
they'll get anything they want.
Yeah,
I mean, which in some way back to, I mean, to what I was saying, like the Republicans, now that they have all the control, they're gonna have to do something. On the flip side of it, maybe they don't have to do anything at all because the federal government will bail them out.
They haven't done anything up to this point, and they've been rewarded for it pretty handsomely. And like from what I can read in the tea leaves, they, like the national Republicans, think the lesson to take away from this is to go all in on critical race theory and trans issues and what have you. They're not talking about homeowner or insurance or wages or anything like that. And why would they?
I don't know, and I think I said this before, but I don't know how winning the message is nationally. I know that we're sitting here talking now like 40 minutes about Democrats getting their dicks kicked in Florida, but like I don't know how winning a national message is to like make America Florida or make America Ohio.
It's not. I think that the canary in that coal mine is Lauren Boebert, who's supposed to win her race and lost.
You know, Jared, I would even do another one. I would even say the re-election of, I think her name is, I forget her first name, but Kelly, the governor of Kansas, because you look at Kansas is a great example. Wisconsin is this too. What Danny was talking about before. What happens when supermajorities and triple threat, or what do you triple threat? You know, like when the Republican Party, when they run all aspects of government, what do you get? You get Scott Walker's Wisconsin. You get what was his name? Kobach's Kansas. You get fucking dystopias. But what did I say? Brownback. Yeah. Brownback. You get dystopias that force those people, well, not force, but like really encourage voters to say, damn, we tried this and this didn't work. Now, what's kind of unique about Florida is like, maybe it's just the cover from all of the social justice stuff and all of the COVID stuff. But yeah, to a large extent, the Republican Party has eluded, despite 20 years of control in this state, they've eluded any real responsibility for what a mess the state is in a lot of ways. And like, try to get anything done on a county or a state level in this state. And like, good fucking luck, man. Like it's impossible. Nothing works in this state unless you incorporate the private sector into it, that's the game. The game is to get everything that's supposed to be governmental responsibility into the hands of the private sector and to intentionally make it look shitty, like it doesn't work correctly, because privatization is the key word. But like, yeah, I don't know, man. I have a working theory too, Danny, and that is like 10 years of Republican leadership usually leads states into the arms of something else, whether it's the Democrat Party or just hopelessness or just not giving a shit anymore, which honestly, that might be what we head towards.
Yeah, we're on like year 24.
Yeah, bro.
Any day now. Keep checking that. Any election now.
I think what was supposed to happen last night, David, is that that illusion you have might be put to rest.
Yeah. I think that it's dead now. So look, I want to talk about something else. I want to talk still about that, about the context of this midterm election, what it means, but more specifically for an issue that I felt like didn't get the play that it deserved or required. And that is the one that we talked about at the beginning of the show, which is immigration. I felt like, I don't know, Jared, Tomas, I'd be eager to hear what you guys have to say. I felt like that issue in 2022 was dominated and owned by the right, and everything was framed in terms of Trump's announcing, that he was running for president. These are criminals. They're driving up the crime rates. Some of them are good people, but we need to, build a wall. I mean, like that. I didn't hear very much build a wall rhetoric, but it was very build a wall adjacent. And it felt like any immigration reform discourse was completely shunted, and it felt like that wasn't a problem anymore. That wasn't a thing anymore. But Danny, you're closer to this. Like, what was your impression of what role immigration played in 2022 in the election, in the midterms?
No, I mean, I think I probably agree with you. I think it was a big issue but almost entirely on the right.
Yeah.
You know, when I talk to voters or political consultants and people in Republican campaigns, I mean, immigration is a big thing. I mean, we are seeing a big wave of immigration, especially at the U.S.-Mexico border. It's very big, and that has been used at least in Florida, successfully as a wedge issue. It was like, we don't want this. We want something else. And Democrats, David, I think to your point, really didn't talk about immigration that much at all. I mean, last night I was at the watch party for Maria Elvira Salazar, who just won re-election in a landslide.
Crushed.
In what was supposed to be a very tight race. She won by like 15 points. But I was talking to her, and she said in like her victory speech that she filed a bill. She said she hopes to ram it through, but basically it is going to address immigration. I mean, how she's talking about it is that's like securing the border, but it's also getting legal status for millions of people who are here that are undocumented. Wouldn't necessarily mean citizenship. You know, there would be like a long process, but they are talking about it. Ever since like early 2021, when Bob Menendez in Jersey talked a little bit about it, like I haven't really heard Democrats talk about immigration or immigration reform. They've been absolutely entirely on the defense, using the same frames of reference and language a lot of times as the right, and they've kind of abandoned it. Like I don't see any movement on that at all.
I want to chime in here because I actually again agree with a lot of what Danny said. So I work. One of my clients is the Immigration Hub, which is a national based like immigration nonprofit organization. And while I didn't work on electoral issues this cycle, and I don't want to work on electoral issues anymore, we did do a lot of like communications work around tracking spending and narratives that are anti-immigrant during the election. And, you know, we found that, and this was in the New York Times, Republicans have spent nearly $40 million on 380 television ads focused on the border crisis and employing language around immigrants, you know, being invaders and, you know, immigration being an invasion, just really awful inflammatory language. And actually there's a Stephen Miller group, the infamous anti-immigrant Trump advisor called Citizens for Sanity that spent $51 million in TV ads across 16 states, employing a lot of this like nativist, you know, white supremacist language. And I think it's true, you know, what we tried to do during the election is we didn't really do electoral work, but we did try to engage campaigns and candidates and stakeholders around messaging that was able to counter a lot of these like anti-immigrant, you know, nativist rhetoric that was, you know, common sense and could reach like voters, right? But did push back on some of the most hateful stuff. And the reality is that, you know, yeah, a lot of these Democratic campaigns and consultants and candidates just don't want to touch immigration. They don't want to address it. They rather ignore it. And not the first, but one of the main rules of communications is that if you don't talk about something, you're giving the space for the opposition to define you. Mm-hmm. And by completely ceding ground on immigration, you're allowing the narrative to be dominated by the Republicans, right? And also like a lot of Democrats, unfortunately, do mirror a lot of the talking points that are coming from the right. So they end up, you know, boosting their messaging. It's really frustrating.
I have I don't know, something I just thought of, but we're seeing in historical perspective, like a historic wave of immigrants coming from Cuba right now, right? People in my family, people close to my family have crossed the border just in recent months. There's a lot of Cubans coming in. And if you look at the latest FIU poll, how the more recent Cuban arrivals, and by that I mean people that came the last couple of years, feel about the two parties. The more recent arrivals favor Democrats. Like, they favor Democrats. I am not aware of any work that's being done by Democrats or Democratic adjacent groups to try to talk and engage with any of those new arrivals.
Nothing.
And if, because let's be clear, like, if nobody talks with them and engages with them, they're probably over time gonna become part of what's become the mainstream Cuban American, which is just staunchly anti-democrat. And I'm not a consultant. I don't work on political campaigns, but I'm looking at it, I'm like, there's some Cuban American groups that do a lot of work in this realm, but they're primarily in English. Like, there's not a lot of early outreach to new arrivals.
Danny, maybe you can like explain a little bit to people who aren't in Miami and maybe aren't even in Florida, like the pipeline for when you are Cuban and when you arrive in Miami. I know it's changed a lot. The contours of it have changed a lot, particularly in the last 5 years, but like there's a specific, like, you know, not Miami Freedom Center anymore, but there's booking, there's processing, there's people that you meet, there's lawyers that you're introduced to, that your family, there's the visit to Ñoque Barato where you get your clothing. There's a whole like five or six things you do, and it's into the loving embrace of like Miami conservative Cubans, usually your family members, right? A lot of times. And it's like, I hate to call it a pipeline because this is just community. These are just people that are like getting by. It's not like some pipeline to radicalization. But to your point, right? Like, can you talk about that a little bit, about the experience of somebody who gets to Miami? Because I know you've reported on that kind of stuff before. Like, they are in a place where politically they're not going to hear much from Democrats, probably, or organized Democrats in any kind of way, right?
No, I mean, especially like the more recent arrivals, and it's, you know, it's a problem everyone's facing with like the high rents and whatnot. So it's really hard for really recent arrivals. So a lot of people are doubling up, tripling up in houses, staying with family and whatnot. But David, to your point, a lot of those more recent arrivals by default are going into households that are very Republican. And then some of them are like internally, because I've talked to some people that are close to my family, right, that just crossed the border. And on the one hand, they're like, thank God that Joe Biden let me cross the border. Thank God that they're getting my foot in the door. You know, I can start here, start a new family. And then in the household that they're now becoming a part of, they're hearing that Joe Biden is the devil.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you know, it's like kind of, it's laughable, but it's not. I mean, like it's a super complex topic.
Yeah,
you know
there's some
I mean?
like there's some paternalism that plays into it, where it's like if you're the family member who's been here for 20, 30, 40 years, or maybe your whole life, like you have a little more credibility to talk about these things. And it's, I mean, I think about it in terms of being Puerto Rican. It's the same thing. I go back to the island, I talk to family there, and they kind of look at me like, you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Puerto Rican politics is different than anything you understand, so shut the fuck up. And like, I imagine that there's probably some, you know, something like that here too. Like you look, you literally still have seaweed on your leg. Like, you know, you don't know anything yet. Don't try to trust us. Joe Biden's not good, which, I mean, like, he's fucking not. But.
Yeah, look, I can share a story that illustrates this. And Danny, the poll that you are referencing, one of the caveats, you know, is that actually it states that when Cubans go into the community, because of like relational context within the community, they are funneled into, you know, a supporting like right-wing, you know, causes, politicians, Republican Party, because of the media ecosystem, because of their family members, because of, you know, the context of their community. So that was a big caveat of the poll, right? That like relationally speaking, very likely that these folks end up becoming Republican, although, you know, that's not, doesn't have to be that way. But then I'm sure you followed the story of the 48 Cubans that were almost recently deported, right?
I haven't followed it super closely.
But okay. So what happened was that because of a, you know, like deal between the State Department and Cuba about, you know, related to accepting Cuban deportations into the island, and other diplomatic nuances, they're basically could start deporting Cubans again into the island, right? So recently, DHS went around and picked up a group of Cubans at their places of work and their homes and put them in immigration detention at the Broward Transitional Center, which is a for-profit geo-operated facility in Pompano Beach. Now, these Cubans, we were very familiar with, us that work in the immigration world, because we actually helped, along with others, secure their release. A myriad of nonprofit organizations helped secure their relief during the last couple of years, because we had a big campaign around immigration detention during the COVID era because of conditions that were horrific always, but exacerbated during the pandemic. We secured their release. They were released. They have their check-ins, and obviously they're going through the adjustment process, blah, blah, blah. DHS jumps the gun the last couple of weeks, rounds them up, like I told you guys, puts them in detention, and there's literally a plane ready on a tarmac to deport them to Cuba. So we find out about this. We instantly mobilize. We call the White House. We call DHS, call State Department. The White House acts. They stop the deportation. We stop the deportation of these individuals. They are released. I think most of them have been released now. And guess who actually takes the credit for it? Maria Elvira Salazar, who literally did not. I'm not lying to you guys. Like, the election's over. Like, she won. She's like cemented there. There's no reason for me to lie about this. I could have talked about this before the election, but I didn't want to get into a back and forth with her office, whatever. But she lies. She takes credit. She uses it to basically rally these people against the Biden administration, and they have every right to be pissed off because they shouldn't have been picked up in the first place. And she does press conferences with them, and basically utilizes them as political pawns. Yeah. And these people now are basically angry at the Biden administration. But the reality is that they should be angry at the Biden administration. But where was Maria Elvira Salazar when this was happening during the Trump admin? You know what I mean? Was she saying anything about the Venezuelans that were being deported then, or the Cubans, or is she saying anything about the Martha's Vineyard flights or anything like that? So at the end of the day, my point is that immigrants, they're always used as a political football. You know what I mean? By people that, quite frankly, don't really give a shit about them because they're not voters, and because they don't have any capital to spend on political campaigns, and they don't have any real power.
Yeah, and the other part of that, I think, for the Cuban American community here, is like, we are remarkably capable of holding like two totally opposing viewpoints in the head at the same time.
Yeah.
On the one side is there's a crisis at the border. We need to end it. We need to secure the border. Thank God our people are coming across. Now they're here. Now we need to keep them here. And it's strictly, I was talking to someone at Maria Elvira's party last night about this, and specifically about the Cubans that are coming across. And she told me, yeah, but they're Cubans. They probably have family here. That's fine. The problem is people that are not like that. The problem is people that don't have families. They're the problem. I'm like, no matter what, there's a caveat that always personally benefits the perspective in some way. And I'm like,
what about the Haitians? The Haitians have a lot of them have family here. They're established here. Like, but yeah, like, it's just disgusting, honestly.
They're up here. There are two types. People talk about immigrants in two types of voices. There are the immigrants who are fleeing a communist state, and those are the good ones. And then there are the immigrants fleeing their position in the capitalist global supply chain. And those are the suspicious ones, because if they're fleeing hard conditions under capitalism, we can't pitch them on anti-capitalism, so they have to go.
If they're fleeing,
the people who hate,
if they're fleeing like the conditions that have been created by like the churn and burn of the West from the global South, then that's bad. Stay in your place. But I'm different.
Yeah, I think you'll have a point on that, but I would argue it's even more complicated, because even within like these communities, like let's say Cubans and Venezuelans, like, they will demonize their own immigrants a lot. Like, Danny, like, you know what happened during El Mariel and like the Balseros. They were like, oh, these are like low class, poor Cubanos that were supporting Castro, this time, and they don't do anything in Cuba. You know what I mean? Like, they dismiss their own people. Even now, with the Martha's Vineyard flights, there's a lot of Venezuelans that are established in this community that are saying, actively promoting conspiracy theories that, these are just Chavista or Maduro agents, and these are just people that are coming from jails because Maduro's emptying the jails and bringing them all here, and they're low class, they're ex-Chavistas. So there's a lot of actually like infighting,
for sure,
and within these diasporas, and the people that have already established, a lot of the times feel distrust of the new people that are coming in.
But I'm saying that happens within the diaspora. I'm saying for people who are not in the diaspora, for people who are just here.
Yeah, broadly, generically observing the immigration trends.
People who were born in Brooklyn, seeing people come in, say, well, there's a good kind of person who comes here and there's a bad kind.
Yeah.
And it mostly falls on, are they leaving a left-wing government or a communist state? And if so, they can stay because I can talk to them.
and even policy-wise, right? I mean, like, Cubans have been really favored in terms of like immigration policy, one of the most generous immigration policies in the history of the world, maybe. And it's because geopolitically, Cuba is an adversary of the United States, and there's a huge electorate in Miami-Dade that swings a very electorally important state for both parties.
Yeah.
Which is the topic of my podcast.
Yes, and what brings us back to the beginning. I want to plug the podcast one more time before we go. Danny, you've been very kind and generous with your time.
Thank you.
I want to like ask one final question, and again, just so everybody knows, you can follow Danny on Twitter at TooMuchMe. That's TOO, as in there is too much Danny. Detention by Design is the podcast that his 6-part, him and the team over at WLRN put together. You can find it on WLRN.org. You can also find it pretty much anywhere that you get podcasts. But Danny, there's a new guy, right? This is like, okay, new dude just dropped, and it's not a new guy, but it's a guy that I think that you're perfectly positioned to talk about. Okay, people try to blame like the recent arrivals from California. They try to blame the villages. They try to blame white folks moving from Staten Island into like planned communities. But I don't think that's the God, if you want to call it a culprit, if you want to call it a hero. The guy I'm talking about is the guy who 12 years ago didn't give a shit about politics. The guy who lives in Westchester. The guy who today has maybe not become a Proud Boy, but he's Proud Boy adjacent. He's got, honestly, Danny, he's got like the same facial hair as you. He's got like kind of the same, like
a little bit longer.
A little bit longer, yeah, a little longer down there. But like, this is the guy, the real Miami guy. Because all these other people are bullshit. They're, whatever. They're late arrivals, they're recent arrivals. These guys are born, raised here, maybe one generation away from immigrant parents or immigrant grandparents, and have fully embraced the message of the right. Have you observed this Fred Perry Polo new Miami guy? And what are your thoughts on that? I mean, I live on Bird Road right by the Palmetto. I see these guys. I go hang out at the same bars as these guys. But like, this is a new thing.
I do have that.
Yeah.
No, I do have thoughts and comments on it. And it's an interesting thing because it has clear political ramifications, but in some ways it's like beyond politics.
Yeah.
And at the core of it, what has happened in like these pockets of Miami that you're talking about, David, it's a social transformation that has happened.
Yep.
Like the conservatives in Miami have created the atmosphere socially where they are offering a completely different reality socially. And that's attractive for people, right? There's nothing. And Tomas, I know you're an organizer. This is not like meant to, comment on your work or whatnot, but like there is nothing on the other side that comes anything close to approaching the level of social revolution, if you want to call it that the right has done here in Miami. There's just nothing approaching that. I mean, David, to your point, it's like a way of dressing. Right. It's a way of wearing your beard. It's like the kind of tats you have.
Right.
And they're doing caravans all the time. It's a sense of community. It's like people gathering, you know, they're turning out to every meeting that they can. And it's like a social event, but it's also a political event. What's the response to that on the left?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah,
nothing. I mean, like there is nobody currently capable or you know, possibly answering that social transformation that it has happened on the right, which I think in the long term is the biggest impediment for any Democrats trying to win back Miami-Dade County. It's like, well, something needs to happen socially. I mean, like in North Carolina, what, a decade ago or something, there was like a whole thing. They flipped the state to Democrat for a little bit. It's kind of Republican again now.
Yeah.
But what was at the core of that? It was like Moral Mondays.
I was going to say
right?
the Sunday meetings, but you're right. It was Moral Mondays. I forgot. Yeah.
It was Moral Mondays. And what was that? That was like every Monday we're coming to these places. Every Monday we're going to talk about this. Every Monday we're going to do this. We're going to become a group. We're going to become a movement. And that's going to be linked up to your identity outside of politics and inside politics. I don't see that happening here. And that's what conservatives have been really, really good at doing. And I don't think that comes necessarily from one person. It's a movement. Like, this is a social movement that has happened.
So there you have it, folks. And we didn't even get into the actual real reason that Miami has lost, that the Democratic Party has lost Hispanics. It's because of Latinx, because of saying the word Latinx. That's the real reason that I'm just kidding. But
I know, and we're gonna have Giancarlo Sopo.
Oh, Jesus Christ! Yeah, let me know when we have him on, because I'll be glad to be on that episode. I want to thank again our guest, Danny Rivero. You can find him on Twitter. Check out his podcast. Danny, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, guys.
That's all for this episode of Why Are We Like This? Be sure to follow us on Apple Podcasts for more episodes, or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Visit us at wawlt.com. Follow us on Twitter at Wolt Show, and on TikTok at Wolt Show. You can also email us at wolt@allpointswest.net. Until next time, this was Why Are We Like This? Wolt Mafia Rising.